As the morning sunlight illuminated the outskirts of town, a young priestess took her first steps into the Adventurers Guild, beginning her journey full of challenges. After the receptionist verified her identity, she was given a necklace with a metal tag symbolizing her rookie rank, known as the lowest level in the system that ranged from copper to platinum. This was the certification allowing adventurers to work legally in territories managed by the guild. Soon after, while still getting accustomed to the bustling atmosphere of the main hall, she was invited by a young adventurer to join a party. He introduced himself as the leader of a rookie team needing an additional member for an urgent mission. Their task was to eliminate goblins causing havoc in a small village. According to rumors, these creatures not only stole food and livestock, but also kidnapped women, leaving many villagers living in fear. Though she noticed the team consisted of inexperienced fighters, the receptionist let them depart after giving a gentle warning. The enthusiastic but careless leader believed that even a few copper-ranked adventurers would be sufficient to deal with low-ranked creatures like goblins. His confidence convinced the young priestess to join, hoping to help villagers with her healing abilities. After traveling a long distance, the group arrived at the cave believed to be the goblins' lair. A human skull hanging at the entrance created an eerie atmosphere that made the priestess tremble with fear. Despite her uneasiness, she pressed forward. Along the way into the cave, she suggested retreating to wait for reinforcements several times, but the leader insisted on proceeding deeper. He claimed goblins had the intelligence of children, boasting he had previously chased away some that wandered into his village. To demonstrate his prowess, he swung his sword in several flourishes, appearing brave. However, lacking proper skill, his long sword struck the cave wall. The team included a female mage who had graduated from a magic academy and was expected to be their tactical cornerstone. None of them carried poison antidotes due to the high cost, so the group relied entirely on the priestess's healing magic and light casting spells. As they ventured deeper, they encountered another skull, making the atmosphere increasingly tense. Due to carelessness, the priestess and the female mage fell behind. While the two vanguards moved ahead, the mage hurried to catch up with them. But the young priestess suddenly froze at a strange sound from behind. From the darkness, a group of goblins that had been lying in ambush appeared, with one immediately lunging at the mage. She managed to react by shooting a flame that hit the enemy. However, the spell casting time was too long, causing her to be pulled down. The monsters grabbed the magic staff from her hands, leaving her defenseless. The priestess tried to use her wooden staff to save her companion, but the creatures managed to stab the mage fatally in the stomach, making the situation dire. Meanwhile, the leader turned back and charged into the goblins like a moth to flame, hoping to save his teammates. The female mage slowly recovered thanks to healing magic, while the remaining adventurer tried to help by stabbing a goblin, but allowed another to slash his leg with a knife. In pain and anger, the swordsman swung his sword uncontrollably. The narrow space caused the blade to hit the cave wall and slip from his hand. When the sword fell to the ground, it sealed their fate. Weaponless, he quickly became prey, torn apart by the goblin pack in the darkness of the cave. The final vanguard, a female fighter, stayed back to fight, creating an escape route for the mage and priestess. She delivered continuous blows, throwing powerful punches and kicks. However, a large goblin blocked her kick, broke her leg, and slammed her against the cave wall twice, depleting her strength. When the female fighter could no longer resist, the goblins didn't kill her as they had the leader, but instead tortured her body shamefully, tearing her clothes and beginning vile acts. The priestess could only take the wounded mage and flee the cave in desperation. However, after dragging herself a short distance, she stumbled. Despite multiple healing spells, the mage's condition grew increasingly serious, with poison silently spreading through her body, draining her life force. As the priestess tried to pull her teammate out of the cave, a sharp arrow suddenly flew from behind, embedding in her shoulder, causing her to fall onto the damp ground. Two goblins pursuing from the darkness appeared right behind them, quickly approaching the unconscious mage's body and beginning brutal acts. Witnessing this horrifying scene at close range, the priestess's mind completely collapsed. Terror rose to its peak, making her unable to control herself, even involuntarily soiling herself. Her panic became entertainment for the savage creatures, further stimulating their violent nature. Just when it seemed a tragic end awaited her like her unfortunate companions before, a light unexpectedly appeared in the distance, slowly approaching. An adventurer wearing metal armor, face hidden behind a helmet, silently appeared amid the tense atmosphere. Without hesitation, this person caught a second arrow aimed directly at the priestess. Another goblin charged straight at the newcomer, intending to finish him quickly. However, its stab to the neck had no effect. With a strong push, the creature was thrown back against the stone wall, and immediately after, its head caught fire from a torch. The remaining goblin tried to escape. However, before it could turn around, a blade pierced its nape, ending its life. After confirming no further threats, the warrior approached the priestess, removed the arrow from her shoulder, and took out a vial of antidote. Though still trembling, she managed to ask about the identity of her timely rescuer. The person introduced himself as Goblin Slayer, a silver-ranked adventurer specializing in hunting goblins. After providing first aid to his new companion, he moved to the motionless female mage, seeing that poison had spread throughout her body, making all rescue efforts futile. He decided to give her a painless death to spare her further suffering. While examining the surrounding traces, Goblin Slayer confirmed that within this cave there existed at least one hobgoblin, a larger and stronger variant than regular goblins, and there were signs indicating the presence of a shaman commanding the horde. The priestess, after regaining her composure, expressed her wish to accompany him. Although inexperienced, she still had magic power to support him. Before proceeding deeper, he used blood from the goblin corpses to smear on her body, eliminating her scent as a disguise to avoid detection. When examining the ambush scene, Goblin Slayer pointed out a series of fatal mistakes made by the inexperienced adventurer group, from carrying swords too long for narrow spaces to turning their backs to stone walls, making them vulnerable to attacks from behind. According to him, though goblins lacked education, they possessed survival instincts and cunning that couldn't be underestimated. During his analysis, a scout unexpectedly peeked out from a rock crevice. Not missing the opportunity, he quickly threw a knife, sending the creature to its grave. To avoid being ambushed when retreating, he set a trap at the exit, then led the priestess deeper into the main lair. At this point, she demonstrated her supporting ability, using a light spell to blind all the goblins gathered ahead. Taking advantage of the chaotic moment, Goblin Slayer charged forward and immediately eliminated the shaman controlling the horde. Unfortunately, a hobgoblin and 8 regular goblins remained in the cave. Unable to confront them directly, both immediately retreated toward the trap prepared earlier. While moving, the priestess cast another spell, limiting the enemy's vision. Thanks to this, the armored warrior delivered a fatal stab to the forehead of the largest monster. To deal with the rest, he poured all the kerosene onto the hobgoblin's corpse and pushed it back toward the horde. Flames erupted, engulfing the area, burning all the attacking goblins. Those who survived didn't escape his sword. When no creature remained to resist, they returned to the final area to check the situation. The female fighter was still alive, but had suffered severe injuries after the atrocities inflicted by the goblin horde. While checking the corpses, Goblin Slayer discovered the shaman wasn't truly dead. A decisive knife strike ended its contemptible pretense. Finally, a secret room appeared behind a stone wall. Inside was a nest of goblin infants. He explained that if left alive, they would soon grow up to become potential threats. Without hesitation, each small creature was eliminated with a blow to the head, completely cutting off future danger. After everything, many women previously captured as slaves in the cave were rescued and taken to the local temple to recover. Among the adventurers who had left the guild with the priestess, only 2 returned. One of them, due to severe psychological trauma, abandoned the path of adventure. As for the priestess, the survivor of the tragedy maintained her firm will, determined to follow Goblin Slayer to continue the path of completely eradicating this dangerous species, born like a programming error in this world. A red-haired girl with a bright, vibrant face was chatting with her childhood friend about her upcoming trip to town. Excitement welled up inside her, not only because it was her first time leaving the farm, but also because she wanted to find a meaningful gift for her dear friend. However, instead of being touched or pleased, the boy seemed annoyed by her kindness. The conversation quickly turned into an unwanted argument. Only when his older sister stepped in to intervene did the atmosphere somewhat ease. Time passed, and the little girl had grown into a mature, gentle yet vibrant young woman. While changing clothes to start her new day, she suddenly heard a familiar sound outside. Her childhood friend, the introverted boy who had now become a proper adventurer with the nickname Goblin Slayer, was checking the fence surrounding the farm. Though grown up, he seemed to still care little about romantic feelings between men and women. For him, goblins were the only thing worth his attention. Instead of admiring the countryside scenery or spending a few minutes chatting with his old friend, he diligently observed every trace on the ground. trying to determine if any creature had sneaked through the area. After completing his inspection, Goblin Slayer returned for breakfast with her family. He ended all conversations by presenting a large bag of money to thank them for their hospitality. Seeing this, the girl's uncle remarked that the monster hunting profession seemed not only dangerous but also quite profitable. Nevertheless, he didn't forget to remind Goblin Slayer to maintain maximum vigilance, especially since his niece wanted to accompany him to town to deliver goods. Despite the uncle's concern, he eventually agreed to let her travel with Goblin Slayer, though she had to push the cart herself. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer walked along picking wildflowers by the roadside, seemingly unconcerned about the weight his female friend was carrying. Along the way, they conversed about Goblin Slayer's recent work. According to the girl, fewer missions meant more rest time. However, he thought differently. In his mind, as long as one goblin existed, peace couldn't be assured. At the Adventurers Guild, a farmer was begging the receptionist to find someone capable of eliminating goblins appearing near his land. Not only did they damage property, but they also behaved deplorably toward women, making everyone extremely anxious. However, with the typically meager reward, no one wanted to accept such a dangerous and disgusting mission except for the man who had dedicated his entire life to exterminating the green monster's Goblin Slayer. When they arrived, another adventurer was boasting about imaginary feats of fighting a bull for hundreds of rounds without getting injured. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer stood silently at the quest counter with his characteristic calmness. Although belonging to the silver-ranked adventurers, one of the highest ranks in the guild, he wasn't respected by his peers simply because the work he pursued was considered dirty and meaningless. No one understood that behind that monotony was an iron determination to eradicate completely the species that specialized in bringing disaster to humans. When the guild staff presented a special high-value mission, many adventurer groups immediately crowded to claim it. Everyone hoped to change their lives through just one expedition. In that chaotic scramble, only Goblin Slayer remained silently standing in a corner. Those who despised goblin hunting missions often failed to understand that each surviving goblin carried a threat for the future. The farm girl harbored an inexplicable concern. Though understanding her childhood friend's reserved, taciturn nature, the prolonged silence since they left the farm worried her. The distance between them seemed to grow, even though physically they remained side by side. Just then, the priestess, a young cleric who had accompanied Goblin Slayer on a recent mission, suddenly appeared, her face showing clear dissatisfaction. Their conversation immediately turned to action strategies, combat tactics, and methods of identifying goblin traces in various situations. Goblin Slayer, though rarely explaining anything to outsiders, this time took time to analyze thoroughly, sharing all his specialized knowledge about those despicable creatures with the priestess. Waiting for the adventurers gathered at the guild to finish selecting missions suitable for their abilities, Goblin Slayer and the priestess approached the reception desk to receive their regular work. No one needed to guess. The guild seemed to implicitly understand that the type of mission he aimed for would certainly relate to goblins. That day, surprisingly, there were 3 goblin extermination requests distributed. However, a team of 3 young people who had just received their professional licenses had accepted one mission. The priestess expressed clear concern, her intuition telling her that these rookies weren't much different from those who had once accompanied her, delusional about their strength. Underestimating the danger, they would ultimately pay with blood and tears. Despite the priestess expressing her intention to help the new group, Goblin Slayer chose a different direction this time. Not wanting him to leave alone, the priestess immediately followed, hoping to continue fighting by his side. That night, he didn't return home. His absence filled the farm girl's heart with doubt about whether her childhood friend might have encountered something uncertain. Meanwhile, inside the goblin's gloomy lair, a horrific scene was unfolding. They had just burned an adventurer alive and were dancing around the victim's body. These savage acts reflected the degenerate and utterly cruel nature of this species. However, the one who had long spread terror among goblins was already present. Memories from a horrific night years ago returned vividly, the day the entire countryside was ravaged. The day when those monstrous creatures trampled on all values, taking away lives, dignity, and innocence from many people. He witnessed his sister being abused by them right before his eyes, then killed when she no longer had exploitation value. From that moment, his heart turned to stone, carrying a blood-sworn vengeance throughout his entire life. The inexperienced team that the priestess feared would meet disaster fortunately survived and returned safely. At this point, Goblin Slayer finally acted. He began a campaign to eliminate another goblin nest by infiltrating the cave, quietly setting fire bait at key points, especially important guard positions. What few people knew was that when a goblin survived a battle, it would continue to learn, accumulate experience, and grow stronger, possibly becoming the leader of a new goblin horde stronger and more vicious. With careful preparation, Goblin Slayer turned the entire lair into a deadly trap. The panicked goblins scattered, trying to find escape routes. The priestess used her defensive skills, creating barriers blocking all exits. Under Goblin Slayer's hands, spells normally used for protection became horrifyingly effective execution tools. Despite having fought alongside him in many battles, the priestess still felt uneasy witnessing the coldness and cruel methods Goblin Slayer reserved for his enemies. In her eyes, eliminating goblins was necessary, but such extreme methods left her heart torn. An unexpected rain fell during the battle, helping extinguish the fierce flames and allowing them to complete the mission quickly. Despite the favorable outcome, the priestess wasn't the least bit happy. She understood better than anyone that the path she was treading with this man would not have an easy exit. From the moment she chose to accompany Goblin Slayer, the door leading to peace seemed to close forever. As the new day began, Goblin Slayer appeared at the Adventurers Guild as usual, his face expressing no emotion. The beautiful receptionist couldn't hide her joy seeing him return safely. Despite the darkness shrouding his past, he continued living because somewhere on a distant farm, someone was waiting for him every day. From ancient times, when the world was still being formed by powerful gods, they continuously rolled dice to determine the fate of the lands. However, when everything gradually spiraled out of control, chaos spread, dragging civilizations into an endless struggle. Returning to the present, a noble high elf had arrived at the bustling Adventurers Guild, seeking a famous figure related to goblin massacres. At the reception desk, the girl requested information about someone called Goblin Slayer. The appearance of a high elf in the guild quickly attracted attention from many people. Elves rarely left the deep forests, let alone appear in such crowded human territories. The receptionist was momentarily confused, both surprised and admiring the cold beauty of the special guest, but seemingly unclear about who was being asked about. The situation became louder when a small warrior with a short stature from the dwarf race interrupted, correcting the pronunciation the high elf had used. He believed the high elf was mispronouncing the name of the person they sought. Whether intentional or not, this comment made the atmosphere between the two races, who already disliked each other, even more tense. The argument became noisy, attracting attention from the entire hall. Finally, a figure from the lizardman race, considered a rare variant from dragon lineage, appeared to intervene, helping to soothe the two hotheads and explaining that the person they were looking for was actually the most famous goblin hunting warrior in the guild, Goblin Slayer. At that moment, Goblin Slayer entered the guild with the priestess after completing a mission. They came to report results, but happened to overhear a conversation about establishing a special team to confront goblin forces rampaging in a distant region. Recognizing content related to his sole objective, he didn't hesitate to follow that strange group to listen to details. Before leaving, he told the priestess to rest after days of continuous fighting against those vile beings. The priestess, still unable to stabilize her psychological state after the dungeon sweep, was approached by two other low-ranked adventurers suggesting cooperation. She politely declined, but both showed disrespect by loudly criticizing Goblin Slayer, viewing him as useless, only concerned with weak creatures. While the priestess was reaching her boiling point, a female mage who had previously collaborated with Goblin Slayer on a secret mission suddenly appeared. She intervened, diffusing the situation. The presence of this high-ranking mage made the priestess feel smaller than ever. She began doubting her own abilities, especially after realizing she hadn't helped much in recent missions. The female mage gently advised her to expand her influence by participating in other activities, rather than continually depending on Goblin Slayer's shadow, a man always immersed in hunting those hideous monsters. Meanwhile, in another corner, the high elf still couldn't believe the man standing before her was the silver-ranked warrior, equivalent to her rank, while his equipment at first glance looked no different from that of an old farmer. However, the lizardman had recognized that all Goblin Slayer's gear was specifically designed for hunting goblins, optimizing combat effectiveness in the narrow, dark spaces of caves. Once again, the elf and dwarf races exchanged words. Though teammates, they never stopped arguing about many trivial things, demonstrating the age-old opposition deeply ingrained in the blood of both races. After arguing in circles, the high elf formally presented her reason for appearing here. The Demon Lord's army was rising. Numerous monster battalions had launched invasion campaigns in southern lands, including an extremely large goblin branch threatening elven territory. Goblin Slayer heard this, but his eyes didn't waver. For him, those grand dark forces weren't as concerning as the goblins causing suffering to humans day and night. He bluntly proposed taking on the goblin extermination mission immediately, as that was the only thing in this world he truly wanted to eradicate. The High Elf Archer could barely contain her anger at Goblin Slayer's indifference toward the greater situation. In her eyes, when the world was on the brink of destruction due to the Demon Lord's forces, focusing on low-level monsters like goblins seemed short-sighted and incomprehensible. Nevertheless, according to her assessment, the threat from these inferior beings couldn't be taken lightly. Before the real disaster descended, they were fully capable of ravaging dozens of peaceful villages, spreading fear and misery everywhere. The lizard priest, the only one maintaining composure amid the tense situation, felt the conversation had begun drifting too far from practical objectives, so he immediately steered the discussion back to the main issue. The moment content mentioned a goblin nest proliferating strongly near the elven forest, Goblin Slayer's steel-cold eyes suddenly lit up with strange attention. Though the Dark Army's landing hadn't directly affected the central region yet, remote areas near the border had been transformed into perfect dwellings for the Green Goblins. They took advantage of the chaos to grow beyond control, forming many formidable monster hordes. Facing this threat, Goblin Slayer directly asked about the presence of advanced individuals like Goblin Champions or Goblin Lords variants with superior intelligence and strength that could be ranked alongside Platinum-ranked adventurers in terms of damage and command. However, many seated around the table, though representing 3 major races, had no specific information beyond the location of ancient ruins where the monsters had established their base. For Goblin Slayer, each passing second was an opportunity for survival snatched away from innocent people. So after gathering enough clues, he immediately left, intending to act alone. When approaching the mission counter to collect rewards from the previous expedition, he unexpectedly encountered the priestess who had been waiting there for a long time. Her face was full of disappointment, as she had nearly been left behind by her close companion. However, contrary to her fragile appearance, her inner spirit was extremely resilient. She was determined not to let Goblin Slayer enter alone what was likened to hell, where death lurked in every corner. Before this unyielding spirit, the entire group High Elf Archer, Lizardman, and Dwarf Shaman also decided to set out together. That evening, they stopped at a makeshift hut on a hillside to prepare for the raid the next morning. Though conditions weren't ideal, everyone tried to make a decent meal. The archer could only watch others eat grilled meat without touching chopsticks due to her vegetarian diet. The atmosphere quickly became cozy when the group organized a small game to understand each other better, beginning with questions about why each person chose to become an adventurer. The Dwarf Shaman was the first to answer. He stated that initially, it was simply for good food. The archer dreamed of exploring the outside world, although her sharing was interrupted by the mumbling voice of her short teammate, preventing anyone from hearing her confidences completely. The priest chose the adventurer's path to eliminate heresy as a way to consolidate his position within his tribe. As for Goblin Slayer, no explanation was needed because his nickname said everything about his life purpose. The atmosphere became more lively when each person began sharing unique snacks. The shaman brought some premium wines combined with grilled specialties from the mountains, causing the archer, who usually abstained from meat, to fall into a state of mild intoxication. Goblin Slayer contributed a piece of cold stored cheese. Its rich flavor made the priest, considered the noblest in the group, wag his tail in delight. While rummaging through Goblin Slayer's backpack, the archer accidentally found magic spell scrolls prepared by him. These were items used to store powerful spells, typically expensive and difficult to create. He refused to reveal their specific content for the simple reason of not wanting risks if someone in the group was captured alive by goblins, a species notorious for their brutality and cunning. The group felt helpless before his stubbornness, but also understood that absolute faith in personal combat power truly made this man different. However, there remained a big unanswered question. What was the true origin of goblins? According to the priest, they appeared from an underground kingdom deep beneath the earth. The priestess recounted that she had been taught that goblins were the crystallization of human sinful behaviors, a consequence of evil karma. According to Goblin Slayer's older sister, they were born from one of the 2 moons hanging in the sky, specifically, the blue moon, a barren planet covered with rock fragments. There, these small creatures always longed to reach the bright stars in the high sky. It was this deprivation and envy that created the hatred deeply ingrained in their blood. Goblin Slayer listened in silence until the effects of strong alcohol began spreading throughout his body, causing him to collapse into sleep like a rock. Not long after, the others also rested, gathering more strength for tomorrow's battle. At a distant farm in the peaceful countryside, the cowgirl was waiting for her dear friend to return, but that familiar figure had not yet appeared. At this time, the adventure team had approached the ancient ruins, the main lair of the goblin horde, ready for a major sweep. The archer led the way, with a bow so precise it could pierce 2 apples with 1 arrow, opening the journey to eliminate the green goblins spreading disaster. The story about the origin of ancient continents seemed to still be hidden in the layers of earth and stone, where a brutal division of power once occurred between the gods. From that chaos, the world gradually stabilized and formed many vast continents, home to countless new races. Each species sought meaning for their existence through many adventurous journeys. Some brought back glory, while others became entangled in harsh fates. Among countless such stories, the Goblin Hunting Warriors adventure group was writing their own legend. The elf archer had barely enjoyed the feeling of triumph after her opening shot when she saw her silver-armored teammate coldly finishing off the guard goblins in the blink of an eye. To avoid being detected by the smell of fresh blood or human breath, the group needed to eliminate all traces before entering the Devil's Nest. The team silently moved deeper into the ancient ruins, which had been rumored to be the battlefield of divine entities in an ancient era. However, that legendary battle perhaps couldn't compare to the bloodstains splattered on the archer's clothes now. A few steps deeper, a strange sign caught the female elf's eye. An alarm trap system was hidden throughout the passage. There was no appearance of wall paintings, typically used by goblin shamans, yet clearly this place was still carefully arranged. With deep understanding of the customs of these evil creatures, the priestess couldn't help but question this unusual level of organization. During a quick exchange, the silver-armored teammate recounted many tactics previously used to clean out goblin nests, from setting fires causing smoke to flow back into the cave, to flooding the nest with water, all aimed at eliminating each individual optimally. Sounding no different from nightmare torture sessions, the dwarf shaman quickly traced the main nest's location on the left path based on geological signs and stone wall structure. However, the iron-armored warrior decided to choose the opposite direction where there was a suffocating stench. No one dared ask much, as everyone knew his senses had never been wrong in similar situations. The smell of goblin excrement was enough to make people like the priestess or archer dizzy. But more importantly, a female elf was being held captive in the worst condition naked, tied in a corner with panicked eyes. When the priestess hurriedly stepped forward to help, the goblin hunting warrior timely discovered a small goblin hiding behind the stone wall. Without hesitation, his sword swung up, ending its existence before disaster could occur. Then, to safely escort the wounded female elf outside, the lizard priest summoned a dragon skeleton and sent along a letter explaining the situation. Before this heartbreaking scene, the archer couldn't contain her emotions, could only cover her face and sob. Meanwhile, the armored warrior silently searched for remaining belongings, discovering a map that the victim had carried something that would help the group continue in the right direction next. Driven by responsibility, the female elf had to push away her mental pain to continue the journey. She carried the bag of items from her kin and was determined not to be left behind. Meanwhile, she once again had the opportunity to execute another excellent shot, taking down a guard goblin. Although her second arrow didn't hit a vital point, her armored companion was ready to finish off the survivor in an instant. Before confronting the more numerous goblins inside the nest, the group needed a short time to recover. To ensure combat power, the armored warrior asked everyone to check how many spell casts they had left. Fortunately, most still had fighting capability, except for the archer, who remained immersed in unease. Without beating around the bush, the cold leader presented a harsh choice. If one couldn't continue, it was best to retreat now. Those words made the female elf nearly explode with anger. However, the shaman intervened in time to maintain the group's spirit. Because what they needed to focus on now wasn't personal feelings, but the cruel creatures waiting ahead, the evil green goblins. The mortal enemy. No one was allowed to falter. The biggest battle since the beginning of the journey was about to begin. The adventurer group finally approached the central area of the ancient ruins, where numerous goblins stood guard. These creatures no longer hid like weaklings in narrow rock caves, but now openly organized defense lines with dozens of individuals surrounding all passages. In this situation, Goblin Slayer didn't choose the option of rushing in to kill recklessly. Instead, he began calculating a cruel but effective strategy, true to his inherent style. When darkness fell, everyone was ready. The shaman performed a type of enchantment spell causing the guard goblins at the front line to fall into a dreamy state, no longer able to resist. Immediately after, the priestess quickly used a silent spell making the entire area sink into deadly silence. Without warning screams, the goblins fell into chaos. The whole group took advantage of the opportunity to kill them one by one, like cutting rice in a field. The archer concentrated all her rage into each arrow, goblin blood splattering to the extent that her bow became slippery, difficult to control. Goblin Slayer maintained his calm demeanor, utilizing the enemy's own weapons to finish off each one. Looking over, the archer couldn't help wondering how a human could perform such cold and effective actions alone. Just when everything seemed to be ending, unexpectedly a huge creature appeared from deep within the ruins. It was no longer an ordinary goblin but a goblin champion, one empowered by demonic forces. The monster roared incomprehensible words, then immediately swung a heavy mace toward Goblin Slayer. Though successfully evading, he still had to endure the pressure from the terrible blow. The goblin champion then cast a fire spell with great destructive power, forcing the priestess to use her protection spell twice consecutively to protect her teammates. The divine power consumed excessively made her unable to stand, collapsing while sweat soaked her robe. Not letting the situation spiral out of control, the priest summoned a warrior skeleton with a death scythe to charge into battle. Meanwhile, the lizardman prepared a stone shooting spell. The goblin champion took advantage of a momentary gap to charge forward, however, was immediately hit by an arrow deeply embedded in its eye, causing it to howl madly. Nevertheless, the monster still had enough strength to resist the counterattack from her teammates. A powerful blow afterward from the monster sent Goblin Slayer flying into a nearby stone pillar. The appearance of the goblin champion now resembled nothing less than a war machine. The group was forced to retreat as all old tactics became useless against this creature's almost instantaneous regenerative ability. The monster howled in insane rage, continuously smashing its hammer into the remaining teammates, destroying the priest's skeleton and forcing the group to devote all their strength to defense. Just when all hope seemed extinguished, Goblin Slayer, who had just been restored thanks to healing magic, slowly approached, signaling that he had a new plan. Despite the monster casting another round of fire magic, the priestess no longer had enough spells to erect protective shields. However, Goblin Slayer timely used a special magic scroll, the one he had kept secret until this final hour. This magic wasn't for direct attack, but for summoning seawater from deep under the ocean floor. The enormous pressure of the water like a razor-sharp blade tore the goblin champion in half, leaving it no time to utter a final word. The battle had ended, with the stench of blood still lingering around the combat area. The adventurer group had just experienced a fierce journey that anyone would find hard to forget. Some elves were sent to support, but by the time they arrived, the work was almost complete. Goblin Slayer collapsed from exhaustion just as he boarded the horse carriage. On the way back, the archer asked the priestess if previous times had been this crazy. The priestess replied with a tired smile that each trip was a life-or-death adventure. According to her, although Goblin Slayer was somewhat cold and rough, deep down he always thought about his teammates. After everything, the archer began nurturing an idea that someday she would lead the entire team into an adventure that he couldn't refuse, to let him feel what true adventure really meant. Gilgon, the normally calm receptionist, was surprised to see the priestess, Goblin Slayer's new companion, being promoted after only a short time fighting alongside him. Meanwhile, the iron-armored warrior silently continued his daily work, examining traces of goblins around the farm area. Cowgirl couldn't hide her concern when seeing Goblin Slayer's body in the recovery phase after the previous fierce battle. Nevertheless, everyone understood that now beside him were strong and reliable allies ready to stand shoulder to shoulder in many new encounters. In another corner of the city, beneath an old sewer, two low-ranked adventurers were assigned to eliminate giant rats. The young man had just thrust his sword through one when he found the blade stuck, unable to pull it out. When another rat suddenly lunged forward, his companion, a girl using a sword with magical abilities, promptly incinerated it with a spell. The young man seemed envious that he lacked the ability to control such an enhanced weapon. However, that weapon had clear limitations. It could only use divine magic once per day. While discussing this, suddenly a swarm of giant cockroaches appeared from nowhere, causing the girl to panic and flee, dragging the boy along. Both had to abandon the sword and their unfinished mission. Returning to the guild hall with a disheveled appearance, they were immediately denied rewards by Gilgon, who requested they leave to clean themselves. Facing a dire situation, both young people faced a tragicomic predicament: not enough money to buy new weapons, but nothing for self-defense if they returned to complete the unfinished mission. Undeterred, the young man decided to try borrowing weapons from those who came before them. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer was helping Cowgirl load goods onto a cart at the farm when his 3 teammates visited after hearing he had been unconscious for 3 days. The gentle lizard priest asked for nothing extravagant, simply wanting to buy some cheese, his favorite food that he had tasted before. Goblin Slayer didn't refuse this, though payment was still left for the buyer to handle. The archer, naturally lively and adventure-loving, invited him to join the group in exploring ancient ruins. Hearing his response promising to consider it, she became extremely excited, as the iron-armored man had rarely agreed to join expeditions not targeting goblins. Returning to the young man who lost his weapon, his borrowing journey continued to face obstacles, as he couldn't use the equipment of his seniors due to the significant strength disparity. The female mage accompanying him felt sorry and gave him a light-emitting candle that could help find objects. Although this gift wasn't as practical as a weapon, it still somewhat excited him, perhaps because of the special way she presented it, making the recipient blush speechless. After days of non-stop fighting, Goblin Slayer visited the town's forge again, ordering more necessary equipment for his next expeditions. Besides ordering weapons, he also inquired about the possibility of finding new spell scrolls. Although he understood very clearly that such items were extremely rare, he was still willing to pay any cost if it could help in exterminating the goblins. Leaving the forge, he coincidentally met the priestess, who joyfully shared news of her promotion. Thanks to surviving the goblin hunt, she felt deep gratitude, remembering that without Goblin Slayer's timely arrival, she probably wouldn't exist now to be recognized for her combat contributions. Meanwhile, the young man continued pleading with other adventurers to borrow equipment. However, most low-ranked individuals were already using borrowed items from those above them, so no one had enough to spare. When feeling desperate, an acquaintance advised them to return to the guild and ask about methods to deal with rats without weapons. Gilgon had no clear answer because although sewer rats weren't strong, dealing with them was extremely troublesome. For more useful information, the receptionist suggested they find a veteran adventurer Goblin Slayer. Despite some hesitation because they had previously complained about him, both decided to meet him, hoping the serious man wouldn't hold a grudge and would guide them on a new path to continue their journey. The pair of inexperienced adventurers, after receiving Goblin Slayer's instructions, approached him with a question. In case they no longer possessed any weapons, was there still a way to continue fighting? Goblin Slayer, with his characteristic coldness, didn't offer a sophisticated solution, instead suggesting they could seize weapons from enemies, specifically from goblins if the mission involved them. However, the current situation would follow a different direction, as their opponents were cunning and extremely filthy sewer rats. With no other option and empty pockets, the copper-ranked adventurers reluctantly followed Goblin Slayer's alternative proposal using wooden sticks for self-defense. Just after parting with the newcomers, Goblin Slayer was immediately called back by Gilgon with a rather special request. She wanted him to take on the role of guardian during a promotion examination for another group of adventurers. At the same time, the young man who had lost his sword during the rat hunting mission continued pursuing his planned course. Using the stick and the light-emitting candle he had been given, both continued down into the sewer system, where they had previously been forced to return in misery. Not long after, they encountered 2 rats probing around a dark corner. The young man didn't hesitate, swinging repeatedly until one lay motionless. Despite the very basic combat means, the results were surprisingly effective. Meanwhile, the evaluation session at the guild also began. A new candidate who loved showing off appeared, trying to impress with shiny shoes. However, Gilgon wasn't easily fooled. Notably, in a previous mission, this braggart had collaborated with a group, but now was the only one able to afford new items. When questioned, he used the excuse of receiving money from family. However, through a magic specifically detecting lies, a nearby female mage exposed the entire truth. The situation was quickly clarified: this person had discovered a treasure while scouting but deliberately concealed it to keep all the spoils for himself. This betrayal immediately resulted in him being demoted and permanently banned from activities in the city. Although showing anger, he didn't dare do anything excessive, with Goblin Slayer's cold gaze following closely from behind. Back in the sewer system, the young man's journey to find his sword was gradually yielding results. When approaching the position where the sword had been lost previously, a swarm of giant cockroaches suddenly appeared, causing both adventurers to flee in panic. With no other choice, they temporarily sheltered in a small gap, hoping to lose the disgusting creatures. Everything seemed peaceful until, from the dark void, a series of flying cockroaches swarmed in, creating a horrifying scene. The swordless young man decided to throw the burning candle directly at them, creating an opportunity for his female companion to use her magic sword to incinerate the entire swarm in a sea of flames. Taking that opportunity, he lunged at the leader, which had swallowed his sword, and used a dagger to finish it off, reclaiming his only possession. Back at the guild hall, Gilgon could finally breathe a sigh of relief, as the earlier incident hadn't spiraled out of control. Goblin Slayer's presence there, though silently observing, was enough to make anyone with disruptive intentions think twice. The receptionist later blushed when seeing Goblin Slayer return from the farm after a successful mission. Her close friend, being very perceptive, had no difficulty noticing this special expression. It seemed Gilgon held a special place in her heart for the metal-armored warrior. Just then, the guild door suddenly burst open. The person entering was none other than the archer, the talented archer among Goblin Slayer's current teammates. She brought important news. A new mission had been issued concerning the appearance of goblins in a distant area. What was special was that the direct commander was the Sword Maiden, a famous heroine who had defeated the Demon Lord years ago. In another place, one of the old subordinates who had served under the Demon Lord, though reduced to a skinny skeleton after a long period of being sealed, still hadn't abandoned his depraved habits. At the moment of preparing for a vile act with an innocent, bound girl, a hero suddenly appeared with a determined demeanor. However, that action wasn't aimed at direct confrontation, but simply to distract, buying enough time for teammates to enter and rescue the young woman. When the group had coordinated satisfactorily, this warrior drew the sacred sword from its sheath, delivering a decisive blow that shattered the enemy. The story of the hero vanquishing evil spread throughout the town's corners like a strong wind, attracting no small amount of gossip. While the atmosphere was buzzing, Goblin Slayer appeared, quickly ending all conversations and bringing his teammates back to reality. An urgent mission had been sent from the Water City, a land famous for its canal-filled architecture, with an attractive reward of a large gold bag for each participant. Despite being urged multiple times, he remained indifferent, pointing out that anyone wishing to participate should prepare immediately, or else he was ready to perform it alone. Finally, the entire group accepted to accompany him. However, the female archer set a non-negotiable condition this time. Goblin Slayer must coordinate smoothly with other adventurers, not acting alone as was his previous habit. Additionally, both the priestess and high elf strictly prohibited the use of fire, poison, or flooding to destroy goblin nests, actions commonly seen in his previous campaigns. Not long after, the group departed on a horse carriage toward the Water City. Throughout the journey, the shaman continuously described the region's foods, such as stewed lamb tendons, crispy river fish, and countless other rare specialties. Interspersed between these descriptions was Goblin Slayer's sudden question about a particularly good flower, information he perhaps had only heard from his childhood friend who had once lived there. Arriving in the city, the adventurer group headed straight to a prominent temple headquarters for worshipping the god of law. The person receiving the group this time was an unexpected figure, the Sword Maiden, former archbishop, and also one of the members of the hero group that had destroyed the Demon Lord exactly a decade ago. With her respectable background, she had ceased wielding a sword to serve under divine guidance and currently assumed the responsibility of leading the supreme faith in the Water City. When face to face with the flesh and blood Sword Maiden, the priestess couldn't hide her emotion. She gave the group a warm reception. However, Goblin Slayer thought the roundabout conversation was too time-consuming and wished to go straight to the main content. The story quickly shifted to a series of unusual events occurring recently. A young woman had been discovered in a condition covered with injuries, traces showing she had endured torture for a long time. Although Goblin Slayer wanted to examine the wounds closely to identify the perpetrator, the High Elf immediately stopped him, fearing he would behave rudely. A few days later, cases of disappearances, attacks, and even abuse of women increased unceasingly. Everything only began to clarify when an adventurer accidentally rescued one of the victims while capturing the perpetrator. To their horror, the culprit was a goblin. After the group carefully discussed, they reached the conclusion that the green goblins were building nests under the water city. The Sword Maiden confirmed this suspicion, revealing she had sent many people down to investigate earlier, but none had returned. Amid that chaos, the Sword Maiden, the powerful pope who had once stood beside the hero in the journey to destroy the demon lord years ago, heard a vague melody. That song echoed amid the flowing water as if written specifically for Goblin Slayer, the character famous for his deep hatred for the green monsters. Although he himself was unaware of its existence, from the emotions in every word, the Sword Maiden understood that the person mentioned was him. Unable to let the disaster continue escalating in silence, the Sword Maiden approached Goblin Slayer, earnestly hoping he would help save the country being invaded. Nevertheless, the Goblin Hunter, with his dry nature, not swayed by pleas or fame, only responded with a commitment that all the monsters hiding beneath the ground would be exterminated completely. This straightforward, almost cold way of speaking left the female pope standing stunned for a few seconds in amazement, unsure whether to feel reassured or worried. Afterward, the adventurer group began planning to infiltrate the drainage system deep beneath the city. A question was raised: why didn't the army participate in dealing with the goblins? The answer was simpler than expected. The military always viewed goblins merely as low-level creatures, not worth deploying troops when they were busy preparing to confront the forces of the demon lord. Therefore, the Sword Maiden had prepared a detailed map of the sewer system, and given it to Goblin Slayer's group. As soon as all necessary information was gathered, the hunter immediately set out. Before leaving, the Sword Maiden held the priestess back, asking if she felt afraid when facing such cruel creatures that bore human form but behaved like beasts. The priestess merely shook her head because she believed that with Goblin Slayer as a companion, even the worst things could be resolved. Under the dark and damp tunnel, everything quickly exceeded predictions. Having barely gone deep, the group already faced multiple waves of ambushes from the goblins. This time, the archer was no longer careless as before, always paying attention to retrieving each arrow after use, avoiding resource depletion midway. Many surrounding stone walls somewhat helped the group avoid being attacked from behind. In the midst of discussing countermeasures, the water above suddenly rose, signaling something unusual. It turned out a group of goblins had used boats to approach, continuously shooting arrows into the hiding area. The priestess immediately erected a magic shield to stand against the arrow rain. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer, quick as lightning, threw a dagger embedding it in the enemy leader's forehead. To prevent the enemy from utilizing the means of transportation, the lizardman was ordered to dig holes to sink the boat. However, this would cause the sewage to rise high, easily flooding the entire tunnel, so the plan was rejected. Instead, Goblin Slayer shifted to a weapon few would expect: a jar of spicy powder. He threw it directly at the goblins, causing them to be stunned. Immediately after, he used the sword summoned by the lizard priest to charge straight into close combat. Meanwhile, the priest supported by rushing in to cause interference, using his long and powerful tail to whip many enemies into the water. The goblins wearing heavy armor were easily pulled under, saving much effort for the group. From afar, the archer continuously pierced through the enemy's defenses with precise arrows, significantly reducing their numbers. One arrow that went off course nearly hit her, but the priestess timely blocked it with a sacred shield. Finally, the shaman summoned a gigantic rock, crushing the goblin boat, marking a successful counterattack by the group. But before they could rejoice, a creature stranger than any goblin appeared. A huge mutated white alligator suddenly emerged, swallowing almost all the monsters struggling in the water. The adventurer group had no choice but to flee. On their retreat path, they discovered another large boat carrying even more goblins than the previous batch. In this perilous situation, Goblin Slayer devised an extremely bold strategy. He requested the priestess to use magic to attach a small light spot on the white alligator's tail. With years of experience, he knew well that goblins typically had a habit of following light sources, believing them to be adventurer groups. The plan unfolded exactly as predicted. The mutated alligator immediately became a nightmare for the foolish goblins who failed to recognize the deadly trap they had just fallen into. After the first reconnaissance campaign, Goblin Slayer began developing suspicions. He was certain that the sewer system wasn't a natural living environment for goblins, because if they truly lived there long term, no creature would dare use boats to move, knowing well that such a huge monster was their neighbor. All signs indicated that there was some hand behind everything, pushing the goblins into the role of tools serving a larger conspiracy. The priestess came up with the idea to invite everyone to relax in the public bathhouse. However, most adventurers made various excuses to avoid it. Many of them chose to return to the tavern for drinks instead. Goblin Slayer was also absent as he was on his way to the farm to send a letter to his cowgirl friend. Left alone, the priestess resigned herself to soaking in the hot tub, relaxing her body while reflecting on many early memories in her role as an adventurer. The life and death moments when Goblin Slayer rescued her in time were still deeply imprinted in her mind. While letting her soul drift with the water, a strange woman entered, causing the priestess to be stunned by the elegant appearance, distinctive aura, and slender figure of the other person. It was none other than Sword Maiden, whom the priestess had long admired as an idol among female clerics. Upon closer observation, she inadvertently noticed the numerous scars on Sword Maiden's back, consequences of past battles she experienced when confronting the horrific goblin species. Without hesitation, Sword Maiden openly shared about the moment she was attacked by the monsters due to personal carelessness. However, instead of blame or showing pity, the priestess gently inquired about the other's health, demonstrating a kind heart with a delicacy quite different from the crowd outside. Before leaving the bathhouse, Sword Maiden said something that kept troubling the priestess's mind, an implication that someday, Goblin Slayer might disappear, leaving an unfillable void. This statement somewhat revealed many bitter and traumatic experiences that Sword Maiden had endured at the hands of that savage species. At the Water City's Guild Hall, the archer became the center of curious gazes due to the rare appearance of a green-haired elf in the midst of human territory. Although she didn't speak, her face clearly expressed contempt for men who only knew how to make worthless, teasing remarks. Her main purpose in coming here was to inquire whether Goblin Slayer had sent the letter home yet. However, instead of answering, the helmeted warrior only silently focused on the mission board as if trying to trace something abnormal. Despite this place having an enormous sewer network, there were no missions related to rat extermination. This made him feel more suspicious than ever. Before starting the new day, Goblin Slayer and the archer stopped by the market to purchase necessary items for the trip. Early the next morning, when the group gathered at the entrance to the sewer system, everyone was surprised by the item. He brought a small canary carefully placed in a cage. This wasn't an ordinary pet, but a tool to detect poison gas. This type of bird had been used by ancient miners to warn about polluted air. Goblin Slayer had learned this knowledge from an old miner, and now he applied it to this campaign because he suspected that whoever was behind the goblins in this place might have taught them to use poison. The plan was to go deeper upstream to find the real mastermind controlling the goblin horde, avoiding being suddenly surrounded. The group intended to take down the leader first to break the organizational structure of the creatures. While following the map, the group accidentally discovered an ancient relic that once belonged to the resting place of warriors from the Divine Era, existing from about 4 centuries ago. Although the architecture of the area bore a solemn, ancient appearance, Goblin Slayer showed little interest in its historical value, as his top priority was always goblin extermination. The relic was built in an extremely complex way with intertwining corridors. Closed stone doors and disorienting passages were all designed to make naive creatures that accidentally entered waste their strength and gradually die in the darkness. Now, that sacred place had been occupied and turned into a goblin nest, making the situation even more dangerous. When the group stopped before a large gate that looked exactly like something out of a fairy tale, the archer felt something was wrong. After a moment of consideration, Goblin Slayer decided to take decisive action when he noticed something unusual about the door in front of them. He used force to kick open the entrance, revealing a gloomy room where a female figure was tied by her limbs, creating a sense of urgency that instinctively made the priestess want to rush to rescue her. However, it was actually just an elaborate trap set up by the goblins, a dry skeleton wearing a wig, serving as bait. As soon as the entire group entered, the monsters quickly sealed the exit and began pumping a type of poison gas throughout the entire space. The situation now became extremely critical. The team was completely isolated and surrounded by dangerous creatures waiting outside. However, Goblin Slayer, famous for his thorough preparation, didn't falter. He distributed a special piece of coal to each person in the group, inserted into mask filters to minimize the effects of the poison gas. Next, he gave the shaman a bag of limestone and burnt clay. When combined, the mixture would form concrete, strong enough to seal the ventilation holes where the poison gas was pouring in. After stabilizing the situation, the group took the opportunity to move an ancient stone coffin to block the entrance, limiting the goblin's access. Despite having exhausted his magic, the shaman didn't stand aside, but continued throwing stones to support from the rear line. Meanwhile, the lizard priest and priestess successively summoned a bone dragon and defensive magic to block the advance of the green-skinned creatures. The previously chaotic space suddenly fell silent, a suspicious silence enveloping the room, perhaps partly due to the poison gas leaking outside, affecting some of those outside. But the main attack force was still waiting for a favorable opportunity. Soon after, waves of goblins appeared, attacking relentlessly. Leading them was a large individual, a goblin champion, a creature with strength equivalent to many platinum-ranked adventurers. The priestess, having to maintain the shield under great pressure from the opponent, began to feel exhausted. Goblin Slayer and the priest immediately rushed to the front line to reduce pressure, eliminating goblins one by one neatly thanks to their extensive combat experience. Although they eliminated many enemies, the real danger came from the leader. Goblin Slayer quickly picked up a fallen sword nearby, delivering a fatal blow aimed directly at the target. However, the opponent was too cunning, using another goblin as a shield while counterattacking with a heavy metal staff, smashing Goblin Slayer into the stone wall. Blood gushing from his mouth choked the priestess with emotion. She completely lost the ability to maintain defensive magic, leading to all teammates falling into encirclement as the small goblins charged in from all sides. The goblin champion advanced straight toward the priestess. Fear made her legs immobile. In an instant, the creature grabbed the victim, lifted her high, and bit hard into her arm, causing the priestess to scream in pain. That sound and the scene before him pulled Goblin Slayer out of unconsciousness. Despite the voice in his mind saying nothing more could be done, he silently struggled to his feet amid the ruins, quickly drinking a recovery potion. Without a word, he charged into the battle line. With his iron shield, he knocked away a goblin about to kill the priestess. Then he moved to the skeleton with the wig from earlier, using those hair strands to tightly weave a garrote, wrapping it around the goblin champion's neck and pulling relentlessly. This was a silent killing technique of assassins, using seemingly useless materials to take down targets quietly. Despite blood gushing non-stop, Goblin Slayer didn't stop until the opponent's neck was nearly completely severed. During this time, the remaining members were gradually liberated and coordinated with each other to fight back against the remnants of the goblin horde. However, though the battle temporarily calmed down, their fate rested entirely on Goblin Slayer's final effort. The rage evident in his eyes finally made the goblin champion back down. Retreating with a few remaining companions, the group temporarily escaped the life or death situation. Goblin Slayer sat down beside the priestess, comforting the small girl who had just suffered great physical and mental trauma. Her wound had been temporarily treated by the lizard priest. But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, Goblin Slayer collapsed again, losing consciousness due to the excessive blood loss in the recent life or death battle. In that life or death moment when his body lay motionless after the bloody battle, a deep stream of memories suddenly rose in Goblin Slayer's mind. He saw himself in his youth, a weak boy without enough courage to pull his sister's hand to escape from the dirty hands of the monsters. When the image of his sister being turned into a toy by those vile creatures appeared before his eyes, regret mixed with helplessness like a flame consuming that immature soul. In that panic, the mysterious teacher, once a goblin shaman, appeared. He was not just a combat guide, but also Sword Awakening. He threw a freezing handful of snow directly into the small student's face to force him to face his own fear. In that strange training session, a challenge was set. Questions that seemed simple but contained deep layers of meaning were presented. Wrong answers would result in ice blocks falling on one's head. The first question related to something that always lurks behind those not strong enough. Goblin Slayer answered death. Fortunately, that answer was correct. For the final question, the teacher presented a more challenging test. What was he carrying in his bag? The answer remained a mystery, but the final advice for the child was to learn to see through the surface of all matters. After waking from the memory-drenched dream, Goblin Slayer discovered his body had been roughly bandaged. Beside him was the priestess, sound asleep. Her clothes had been completely removed. He silently pulled the blanket to cover the fragile body of the young girl, then left the bed and sat in a corner to ponder. Not long after, Sword Maiden visited. That high-ranking priestess raised a few questions related to the strange experience just past, where 3 people lay in one bed without a piece of cloth covering their bodies. Did he feel anything different? However, for someone as iron-willed as Goblin Slayer, it was nothing more than a traditional magic recovery method when the soul was severely damaged. Only closeness with others could revive the rotted human part. Sword Maiden then alluded to the tragic story that happened to her many years ago. At that time, she was captured by a horde of savage goblins, those who took everything from dignity to the will to survive. From the depths of despair, the faint image of a metal-armored young man appeared in her memory, a vague figure amid the nightmare. She posed a silent question about whether that person had truly come to save her, then left the room in silence. Meanwhile, the priestess began to wake up, panicking when she discovered her embarrassing situation. However, Goblin Slayer only silently observed her wound to ensure there were no serious complications. After that awkward moment, the group of friends unexpectedly entered to check on their comrade who had just returned from the brink of death. Seeing the group still intact, their spirits were somewhat revived. During the light meal afterward, the young friends kept their previous promise by enjoying the meal together before continuing their journey hunting down the enemy. The destination this time was the underground sewer, where the goblin champion with his remaining eye was hiding. The trio of elf, dwarf, and lizard decided to scout ahead so that Goblin Slayer and the priestess could rest for another day. Surprisingly, for the first time, the warrior who always suspected everything had truly placed his trust in his teammates. On the way to the forge to check on weapons damaged after the recent battle, the priestess tried to converse with her taciturn companion, but Goblin Slayer only replied with a few short, cold sentences to the extent that the girl just wanted to smack him with her sandal. Nevertheless, he promised to try changing his communication style to make her feel less invisible. The two stopped in front of a smithy, where the priestess decided to repair her chainmail armor, a gift that had once received Goblin Slayer's only compliment. Although the blacksmith advised replacing it with a completely new set, the priestess insisted on keeping it. When the blacksmith coincidentally discovered that the customer before him was a silver-ranked adventurer, a warrior famous throughout the region for his obsession with goblins, the atmosphere in the workshop immediately became tense. Though not saying much, Goblin Slayer quickly offered a large sum of money in hopes of getting the armor repaired as soon as possible. Recognizing that the current equipment no longer ensured safety as before, he didn't hesitate to spend more to purchase a new sword. After completing business at the forge, he and the priestess walked along the bustling street in the heart of the Water City. The two coincidentally discovered a stall selling a rather strange specialty dessert with a sign clearly indicating its origin from a land foreign to them. Seeing the smooth, melting cream in the stone bowl, the young girl couldn't hide her curiosity. As they moved closer, the cool fragrance spread, causing both to decide to taste it. The seller shared a unique secret. They used a mixture harmonizing fire and water, blended with a small amount of fresh milk, thereby creating this soft, smooth cream. As the sun gradually set behind many ancient rooftops, the two sat on the steps, enjoying the dessert while conversing about what they had faced and would face. In that rare peaceful moment, he suddenly recounted a story about once being so afraid that he dared not cross a gloomy piece of land, despite his sister and childhood friend teasing him incessantly. Although hurt by the mockery, he finally crossed it himself, not to prove anything to anyone but simply to overcome his own limitations. Goblin Slayer expressed appreciation for the priestess's companionship. However, he didn't want her to risk herself for anyone, including himself. Nevertheless, the priestess chose to act not for anyone else, but for her own belief and will, not because of expectations from any man. She quickly swallowed the remaining cream and gently suggested they both return. Meanwhile, a special order that Goblin Slayer had placed long ago finally arrived, thanks to the help of an acquainted brother from the merchant guild. The delivery person couldn't hide his puzzlement at the decision to buy an item from a distant city just because of its special smoothness. However, for Goblin Slayer, even the smallest details carried vital significance when confronting monsters born from darkness. Those things weren't just for exterminating goblins, but also served bold plans ahead. Elsewhere, at the familiar farm, the old uncle expressed concern when discussing the possibility that one day, those small creatures might reverse the situation. But his niece remained steadfast in her belief that that special friend would definitely return, as this was his only familiar home. Back with the team, after gathering complete information from the reconnaissance of the three teammates, they continued deeper into the ancient ruins. This time, Goblin Slayer brought along a large bag of powder and a specially crafted oil lamp instead of torches. During exploration, the group discovered that the room ahead contained an extremely dangerous creature, something in the shape of a grotesque protruding eye. As soon as the priest threw a stone, it immediately shot an energy beam that incinerated the stone wall. What made the group wary wasn't just its destructive capability, but also the ability to nullify magic of that deformed monster. Goblin Slayer, as always, presented a surprising strategy. Distract the eye with bows and arrows, then have the shaman divert its attention with the allure of alcohol, after which everyone would take the opportunity to escape. Meanwhile, he silently spread fine powder throughout the room, something that could become a bomb if activated in an enclosed environment. The priestess held the most important blocking role, establishing a magic barrier blocking the exit, forcing the monster to maneuver only within the powder-filled space. The plan reached its climax when the monster launched an energy beam that hit the bone dragon lying inside, creating a tremendous explosion. Thanks to this, the eye monster was incinerated by its own power, turning a simple idea into a fatal blow. However, what attracted their attention immediately afterward wasn't the creature's remains, but an ancient mirror hanging on the rock wall. Though shaped like an ordinary mirror, it emanated a distinctly mystical aura. On the outside, that mirror looked no different from a regular decorative item. However, when the priestess accidentally touched its surface, a surprising image appeared reflecting a scene from the other side where a goblin community was residing, along with the strange boats they used to move around. Undeniably, this was a rare artifact, serving as a spatial gateway taking users to a predetermined area. Its value was beyond any standard measure, as this wasn't merely an ancient relic but a legendary treasure. However, its existence concealed many mysteries. Someone had deliberately summoned those monsters to this area, guided them in using transportation means, and even arranged a terrible creature to guard it. This proved the entire plan had been arranged beforehand with a clear purpose. Though countless questions remained unanswered, now wasn't the appropriate time to investigate the origin of the mastermind. The large explosion earlier had attracted nearby goblins, drawing them in increasingly large numbers. Goblin Slayer suddenly recalled the teaching from his mentor, always know what you have in hand. He immediately reviewed all the equipment he was carrying to calculate a response plan. No matter how tense the situation, he maintained his stance that he would never fall into the same trap as before. The group quickly prepared a solid defense line to face the battle, though the archer trembled somewhat remembering her near-death experience before. This time the thorough preparation helped her maintain her spirit somewhat. Next, each group member checked their remaining magic power. The shaman kept one final spell for the most critical moment, while the priest took on the task of removing the mirror from the wall and summoning a dragon skeleton to protect the high elf. Meanwhile, the green-haired archer's mission was to eliminate as many goblins as possible from a distance. When all plans were settled, the monsters began flooding in like a flood. Goblin Slayer initiated combat by supporting teammates through diversionary strikes, helping the high elf focus on taking down multiple targets. Although the group eliminated quite a few, the number of enemies remained suffocatingly large. The archer continuously pulled her bowstring to the point of nearly numbing her arm. During this time, the dragon skeleton summoned by the priest blocked many poisoned arrows shot by the monsters. As the battle gradually intensified, the goblin champion appeared, forcing Goblin Slayer to confront it directly to attract attention. While rushing forward to cut down several ordinary goblins, he simultaneously tried to retrieve arrows for the archer. Some enemies slipped through the defensive line, forcing the shaman to use rocks to strike them directly in the head to stop them. Realizing she was just watching without contributing much, the priestess decided to rush over to help the priest remove the mirror. Again, the goblin champion swung its weapon toward the main character, but he managed to dodge, then retreated to lure it toward an area where many goblins were standing, causing it to inadvertently strike its companions, reducing enemy forces. After a period of holding out, the priestess and priest successfully removed the mirror from its original position. Following Goblin Slayer's instructions, they immediately turned the mirror's face toward the ceiling of the ruin. At that point, the shaman stepped into a pivotal role. The goblin champion finally realized the adventurer group was doing something dangerous. It quickly rushed to attack the dwarf, but a perfectly aimed dagger throw from Goblin Slayer caused it to lose several fingers. Not letting the opportunity pass, the shaman and priestess successively used rocks to hit the weak points of the ceiling, causing the structure above to gradually sway. The priestess then utilized her last incantation to obscure the vision of the remaining goblins. When everything was ready, the shaman used all his strength to collapse the entire roof of the relic, crushing all surviving monsters under earth and rocks, thanks to turning the mirror's face upward. The entire amount of collapsed earth and stones didn't harm the adventurer group, but was directly transported to the goblin horde's final base. The main character didn't show much interest in the rare item the group had just obtained after the fierce battle. What concerned him more was keeping his commitment to the archer throughout the fight. He didn't use fierce flames, vicious poisons, or dirty water to attack those monsters. However, instead of a word of appreciation, the elven girl sent him flying straight down a nearby rocky ravine with a kick full of frustration. After completing the campaign, Goblin Slayer sought out Sword Maiden, someone who once bore the title of hero, after her feat of eliminating the Demon Lord to inquire about some suspicious matters, especially about the strange mirror and the creature guarding it. Not because he was particularly discerning, but simply because he knew how to approach the right person to gather information. That she was the first person he chose to question wasn't without specific reason, as many suspicious things began from her. One of the clues that made Goblin Slayer suspicious was the appearance of the giant white creature, the albino alligator, which had no intention of attacking them, but only wanted to drive away intruders from the area it guarded. If there was no connection to the protection system, why did it intervene just as they approached the mirror? Additionally, such a vast sewer system, yet no adventurer had set foot there or been assigned any cleaning mission that was truly suspicious. Sword Maiden eventually had to reveal that the mirror's appearance in that place was the result of a deliberate conspiracy. A former servant of the Demon Lord had quietly placed it there to open a portal summoning the monsters. However, fortunately, the hero had eliminated the mastermind beforehand, preventing his revenge plan from being completed. Nevertheless, Sword Maiden, who had encountered goblins many years ago, still carried a deep fear, having been honored as a hero herself. Seeking help because of common creatures like goblins made her feel humiliated and embarrassed. Though deep in her heart, she knew that threat was much more dangerous than their appearance suggested. The mirror, the source of the initial trouble, was planned to be given to Goblin Slayer's group as a form of repayment. However, instead of keeping it, he decided to cover the mirror's surface with concrete before throwing it back to its original place. That way, no one in the future would be able to exploit its teleportation ability. This puzzling but effective action made Sword Maiden just laugh, because it was simple yet extremely logical. At the end of the meeting, Sword Maiden had some hope that if one day she faced danger again, Goblin Slayer would come to help. However, his answer wasn't at all what she expected. He didn't promise to save her specifically, but only committed to eradicating the goblin species even if they only existed in her nightmares. That statement made Sword Maiden feel as if a burden had been lifted, because at least she knew she had placed her trust in the right place. The next morning, the group returned to the town where they lived with valuable rewards in hand. Although the amount received wasn't small, the lizardmen still expressed regret that the teleportation treasure couldn't be kept. In contrast, the shaman only needed to survive to continue drinking a few glasses of good wine to feel life was complete. The priestess was settled in a rare peaceful moment when she suddenly noticed a feather falling onto Goblin Slayer's hair. Thinking he was asleep, she gently approached to pick it up for him. Unexpectedly, he was still awake, and what surprised everyone more was that he wanted to try making a sweet dish he had heard about in the Water City cream made from milk. This novel idea greatly delighted both the lizardman and shaman. The archer, who was usually quite reserved when invited to taste food, couldn't hide her interest. Under the atmosphere of war gradually coming to an end, the great warrior group, those named heroes after an arduous journey, were stepping forward. Their goal was to crush the remnant forces of the Demon Lord, the greatest remaining beast threat to humanity. Meanwhile, in a place far from that main battle, another person quietly continued living his own story. Goblin Slayer, carrying an unquenchable obsession, was immersed in memories, recollections associated with a part of life seemingly buried by time. In childhood, he had once dreamed of stepping out into the world, becoming a hero, or at least a true adventurer. However, the day his beloved sister was brutally tortured by green goblins and then killed, all those aspirations turned to dust. The anger nurtured from then had transformed him into someone living for a single goal: eliminating all goblins from this earth. He had once let jealousy take over to the extent that his sister had to comfort him. She was the first to teach him to control emotions, to learn not to be envious. Otherwise, he would become as ugly as the green imps he hated. That night, his sister had cooked a wonderful stew. A simple memory that was also the last time he enjoyed a meal she prepared. Waking up in his current life, Goblin Slayer continued his familiar habit of examining traces of monsters around the farm where he worked. His childhood friend, Cowgirl, called him in for breakfast. During the conversation, Cowgirl's uncle expressed relief at hearing the Demon Lord had been defeated. Nevertheless, though the outside world was celebrating victory, Goblin Slayer didn't relax his vigilance. In his eyes, goblins were still a potential threat that no one should take lightly. After breakfast, Goblin Slayer decided to go to town with Cowgirl, partly to shop, partly to see if any goblin extermination missions had been posted on the guild board. This time he appeared without wearing his familiar armor, creating such a different image that a spear-wielding adventurer who regularly stayed at the guild engaged him in conversation without recognizing his true identity. That person believed someone without weapons or armor couldn't be a true adventurer. He then boasted loudly about how people like him were flocking north to hunt down the demon lord's remnants in pursuit of fame. Fortunately, a female mage who had previously accompanied the spear warrior recognized him immediately. She informed him that today there were no missions related to goblins. Afterward, Goblin Slayer returned to the forge to receive a spare armor set from the old blacksmith. Looking at the scratched equipment as if just torn by monster claws, he couldn't help but grumble about the way he fought too intensely. While walking around, Goblin Slayer accidentally saw a training session taking place in an open space near the guild. A silver-ranked adventurer was teaching combat skills to two young soldiers. Clearly, both were new to the profession. Although not acquainted, a holy knight standing nearby still initiated conversation with Goblin Slayer. Actually, the rookies being trained weren't from the holy knight's squad, nor were they related to the veteran practicing nearby with a large greatsword. Those two experienced individuals simply wanted to pass on skills to the next generation when they saw the eyes of the young ones still innocent and curious. The desire to learn was evident in the eyes of the boy who had lost his sword, secretly watching the training session without looking away. At the same time at the guild, the priestess was entering right during the bustling moment. Receptionist Gilgon greeted her with a slight smile, but her expression changed when she learned the person she was looking for was Goblin Slayer. The priestess couldn't hide her emotions when hearing about recent missions related to the Water City, reminding her of that rare peaceful moment when she leaned against her familiar teammate during a quiet night. At this point, Gilgon handed her a letter sent from the Water City. The writer was the nun Sword Maiden. Both the priestess and Gilgon were curious about what the Archbishop Sword Maiden wrote to him, but Goblin Slayer quickly put the letter in his pocket. By now, the familiar team members had also arrived at the guild. They wanted to invite Goblin Slayer to attend a small celebration on the occasion of the group's reunion. Initially, he refused because he had promised Cowgirl something private. Nevertheless, she appeared right after that, making it impossible for him to decline anymore. The group quickly sat at the table, eating while discussing the good news. Recently, a young hero had eliminated the Demon Lord, and was recognized by the Adventurers Guild as the 10th Platinum-ranked adventurer in history. The lively atmosphere continued as the shaman raised his wine glass, offering Goblin Slayer a cup in celebration. However, this time he didn't drink, so Gilgon gave him a bottle of honey, instead a revitalizing drink suitable for use after intense battles. Goblin Slayer expressed his intention to buy a few more bottles in preparation for the next goblin hunts. His level of obsession with this species truly made many people puzzled. At this time, the greatsword-wielding adventurer group also entered for lunch. They willingly covered the meal for the rookies who had been training all morning as a way to encourage their spirit. Taking that opportunity, Gilgon shared that the guild had plans to build an official training center for new adventurers. It would be managed by veteran warriors, both imparting experience and earning additional income to maintain their lives after retirement. As the conversation was getting lively, Gilgon suddenly turned to remind Goblin Slayer that if he continued his reckless actions as usual, she would find a way to prevent him from continuing his profession, at least for a period long enough to come to his senses. Though the threat was gentle, it carried a clear concern that no one could deny. Finally, the party ended in a warm atmosphere. Goblin Slayer and the priestess left the guild, returning to the farm where they temporarily resided. On the way back, he opened the letter from the female swordsman who had once accompanied him. The content was just a few lines inquiring about his health, along with a reminder to always be vigilant, because even though the Demon Lord had been eliminated, the remnants of the demon army were still hiding everywhere. Just as she said, this piece wasn't truly the end. Night fell, and as the moon shone in the sky, Cowgirl gently pulled Goblin Slayer to lay his head on her lap. The space was quiet, with wind blowing gently across the field. She didn't rush, just silently looking at him, hoping that the companion who had stood shoulder to shoulder in deadly places would soon realize it was time for him to think about the future. About something beyond a life only knowing goblin hunting. Because whether warrior or hero, eventually everyone grows weary. But the next morning, everything returned to its original orbit. While checking the land around the farm, Goblin Slayer discovered a series of strange footprints extending toward the forest. These familiar traces signaled something undeniable: the green goblins hadn't stopped. Would this be the final battle in the journey of the hunter who lived for a single goal: to completely eradicate the monsters hiding in the darkness? On a peaceful morning, Cowgirl was preparing breakfast in the simple kitchen. The girl smiled slightly as the aroma of toasted bread spread throughout the space. Suddenly, the door opened hastily. Goblin Slayer entered. His voice was deep and urgent as he announced a dangerous discovery. While monitoring the surroundings, he had found countless small footprints scattered near the farm area, signaling a scout goblin horde approaching from the forest edge. According to experience accumulated over many years of fighting, he clearly assessed that only a leader with high intelligence would have the ability to command this group. It could be a goblin lord, a rare individual in that inferior species, but superior in intelligence and strength. If the battlefield were a dungeon, where the cramped terrain made it difficult for them to organize counterattacks, eliminating 100 goblins wouldn't be a problem. However, the plains terrain around the farm was completely different: wide open space, no barriers, no cover points. The flexibility and large numbers made it impossible for Goblin Slayer to handle the situation alone. According to his prediction, the attack could happen tonight or the next night. Too urgent to find reinforcements in time. Goblin Slayer understood his limitations well. He didn't possess extraordinary abilities like those platinum-ranked individuals, much less compared to the hero who had just eliminated the Demon Lord. Therefore, he requested Cowgirl leave this place as soon as possible. Although warned that if she didn't flee, the price she might pay could be ultimate suffering, Cowgirl still resolutely stayed. For her, losing the livestock meant not only losing her livelihood, but also losing a place tied to childhood memories and the home that once belonged to Goblin Slayer. Above all, she knew well that her friend wouldn't abandon this land, and she couldn't turn her back during such a time. The girl's determination made Goblin Slayer unable to give up, forcing him to act to the end. He remembered his foster sister's instruction never to make women cry. The image of the middle-aged man who once taught him how to hold weapons also appeared as a reminder that responsibilities needed to be shouldered. Without hesitation, he went straight to the guild, where adventurers were gathering after their daily missions. Standing before the silver-ranked warriors, Goblin Slayer announced a major unprecedented attack by a goblin horde led by a goblin lord. Initially, people maintained a casual attitude, considering that warning merely an exaggeration from someone obsessed with an inferior monster species. However, the faint smile quickly disappeared when they heard the number hundreds. And especially, the leader possessed rare battle intelligence, one who had caused many villages to be devastated. Although he had bowed his head begging, his plea still couldn't change their choice, as the probability of failure was too high, the risk of exchanging lives too great. The spear-wielding warrior stood up to refute that one-sided view. He reminded everyone that the nature of adventurers was not to refuse anything, as long as the price offered was commensurate. Seeing her teammate being opposed, the archer nearly rushed in to argue, but the priest stopped her in time, fearing the situation would spiral out of control if the entire guild erupted in chaos. Gilgan, having witnessed everything, immediately left to meet the guild master, the only one who could decide on rewards in a short time. Goblin Slayer then declared his readiness to offer everything he had: money, weapons, time, experience, even his life in exchange for help from the guild's adventurers. The guild master initially remained unmoved, even posing a situation. If what he wanted was death, could it be delivered right now? Goblin Slayer silently refused that because his death would only cause a few people to suffer. That statement, though simple, was enough to touch the tough man standing before him. The guild master agreed to offer a gold coin for each goblin head in this special event, creating conditions to attract adventurers to participate. The greatsword-wielding warrior, who had once been saved by Goblin Slayer along with his entire village from a previous disaster, though claiming to participate for money, couldn't hide his genuine gratitude. Under the dim night sky, the atmosphere around the farm area became tense as a bowstring. All adventurers were prepared, arranged in multiple defense layers to prevent the attack from the monster horde approaching. In the darkness at the front line, the light footsteps of goblin scouts promptly conveyed information about the defensive line to the leader, the Goblin King. Upon receiving the report, he ordered his entire army to prepare to sweep away everything in their path with full force, with the first objective being to transform this peaceful land into a stronghold for a large-scale campaign to extend tentacles throughout the region. Meanwhile, Cowgirl, the childhood friend of Goblin Slayer, sat silently in a corner of the warehouse, endlessly worried about the impending battle. Just then, sounds from outside signaled that the raid had begun. The goblins not only flooded in but also used despicable tactics, bringing captured young women as living shields, hanging them on wooden boards to distract the fighting spirit. They believed this would make defenders hesitate or waver. However, that strategy was quickly neutralized. The dwarf and female mage coordinated smoothly to cast a sleep spell, causing the monsters using humans as shields to collapse. As soon as the signal sounded, adventurers hiding around the area immediately rushed out, freeing all the victims. The archer group that had been hiding on the rooftop then supported the rescue force to return safely. When all living shields were rescued, the counterattack force from the bushes immediately acted. They were veterans, each strike carrying absolute precision. Many enemies were cut down before they could react. A few tried to shoot stealthily at Isabel, but all were countered by the mage with a spell that bent the attack stream. The situation became increasingly tense when the goblin cavalry was ordered to attack from the left flank. Fortunately, 2 young rookies had been waiting at the ambush point since the afternoon and quickly transmitted the information to the main camp. Immediately, all adventurers retreated to defensive positions and established formations according to coordination from high-ranking warriors. As soon as the enemy came within range, many sharp wooden barriers were pulled up, piercing the wolves' stomachs, causing the goblin riders to be thrown from their saddles. Taking advantage of the chaotic moment, the rear force immediately advanced to eliminate the surviving enemies. The initial success was the result of Goblin Slayer's correct prediction of almost all goblin tactics, from using living shields to scout groups with magic teams. Thanks to thorough preparation, from wooden stakes to clear task division, the entire defense line firmly withstood fierce attack waves. Even the paladin, who had doubted Goblin Slayer's abilities, had to acknowledge the tactical prowess and extensive experience of this campaign's leader. However, not everyone coordinated well. In the forest, 2 greedy adventurers had secretly separated from the group to claim higher rewards by hunting alone. That thoughtless action cost them when they encountered an exceptionally dangerous individual, a goblin champion. Both were quickly eliminated. Their bodies were thrown by the monster toward the main camp, aiming to create a psychological effect on those remaining. Nevertheless, fear only affected some inexperienced adventurers. Most of the silver-ranked force, along with other veteran warriors, saw this as an official declaration of war, making their spirits even more fiery. Facing 2 goblin champions and a large group of hobgoblins, they maintained their formation, ready to accept the challenge. The battlefield atmosphere shifted to a more intense phase than ever before. The female mage even calmly took a sip of water amid the chaotic battle, showing the absolute confidence of the core group. The bewildered new recruits wondered what Goblin Slayer, the initiator of the battle, was doing amid that chaotic scene. They didn't have to wait long for an answer, as he was deeply venturing into the battlefield, silently pursuing the ultimate target, the Goblin King. In a deserted corner of the forest, the leader of the Green Goblin horde clearly sensed the overwhelming power of the opponent. Knowing defeat was approaching, it fled in extreme fear, hoping to preserve its life for revenge later. However, that hope only lasted for a few brief moments. The one who had destroyed countless families, burned many homes in the darkness, finally faced the most fearsome hunter for its species, Goblin Slayer. The 2 stood not far from each other, tense eyes locked on the opponent, each second passing seeming elongated by accumulated hatred. When the whistling wind through the grass quieted, the Goblin King immediately lunged, initiating the death battle with a powerful, killing intent-filled strike. However, the shield in Goblin Slayer's hand timely neutralized that blow, protecting him from the deadly strike. In a flash, while the opponent was still charging forward, Goblin Slayer quickly ducked down, scooped up a handful of dirt, and threw it directly into the monster's face. Taking advantage of its obscured vision, he spun around, delivering a fatal blow to the opponent's head. The crown fell to the ground, rolling, but the king still managed to launch a powerful counterattack, sending him flying far away. Despite being knocked down, that warrior still rose up without hesitation. His sword tip once again pointed straight at his arch-enemy. On the other side, the archer and shaman were conversing lightly. Their hearts still hadn't ceased being chilled when thinking about the scene of hundreds of goblins simultaneously flooding into the town. Everyone acknowledged that without Goblin Slayer's profound knowledge and thorough preparation, that disaster would surely have swallowed this place whole. However, the attack hadn't yet concluded. On the front line, 2 goblin champions were still holding out against pressure from silver-ranked adventurers. The warrior pair with the greatsword and female holy knight initiated their tactics by distracting one of the 2 monsters, creating conditions for the remaining teammate to deliver the finishing blow. Though that champion was cunning, setting up a small goblin to ambush from behind, the female knight's quick thinking quickly neutralized that trap. She chopped off the monster's hand, then let her companion split its body in half with a giant greatsword. Because he had been rescued just in time in the previous battle, the sword-wielding young man yielded the monster's head to his teammate as a silent thank you. Not far away, the priest was holding out alone against the remaining goblin champion. Though seemingly struggling because the opponent was very agile, he maintained absolute calm. When the monster threw the chain and missed, he didn't avoid as before but surprisingly accelerated, charging straight along the rope and piercing the opponent's neck, finishing cleanly without needing assistance. On the battlefield now, only the Goblin King remained alive. Although severely wounded, it still showed terrifying strength by continuously pushing back Goblin Slayer. He was knocked down, no longer able to defend effectively as before. In the room at the farm, the childhood friend asked her uncle if he still held any prejudice against Goblin Slayer, as what that warrior had done had far exceeded expectations. Meanwhile, at the forest battle site, the situation became precarious. Although Goblin Slayer tried to plant his sword into the monster's stomach, his strength was no longer sufficient to finish it. Before being crushed under the enemy's fury, a magic wall suddenly appeared in front of Goblin Slayer. From the forest, the priestess appeared, establishing a second barrier, causing the Goblin King's body to be tightly compressed. The sword fragment already embedded in its stomach penetrated deeper. Nevertheless, the monster switched to crying and begging in desperation, revealing the inherent cowardly nature of goblins pretending to be weak to hide their ferocious nature, then suddenly counterattacking when the opponent let their guard down. However, the priestess wasn't deceived by this trick, and at the decisive moment, Goblin Slayer sat up, concentrating all his strength into a final thrust, ending the dirty life of the horde's leader. After that life-or-death battle, he fell into the priestess's lap. The young girl had, for the first time, not followed Goblin Slayer's initial plan. Instead of using all 3 shield incantations to eliminate the Goblin King as he had instructed, she kept the final spell to heal her close teammate. That action demonstrated the strong trust they had for each other. Afterward, they supported each other back to where other adventurers were resting, welcomed with joy because the dedicated commander had survived the terrifying battle. After the fierce battle, Goblin Slayer quickly went to find his closest friend to inform her that he was still safe, and he had also kept his promise to protect this home, a place holding childhood memories for both of them. Meanwhile, the heroines group, one of the strongest adventurers of the era, was casually strolling through streets about to welcome a festival, laughing carelessly, as if the world had never gone through many chaotic moments. Although understanding very well the cruelty and aggressive nature of the goblin species, because they were accustomed to confronting stronger entities like giant monsters or evil dragons, those accompanying her underestimated this threat. Nevertheless, the heroine still felt somewhat reassured knowing this land still had an adventurer known as the Bane of Goblins, someone who had always silently protected the weak from the claws of those evil imps. Without that person's existence, peaceful villages lying along the border would perhaps now be breeding grounds for those creatures. At the Adventurers Guild headquarters, the initially somber atmosphere was quickly dispersed by lively laughter and conversation as warriors sat gathered, raising glasses to commemorate comrades who had fallen in the recent battle. Afterward, they didn't hesitate to celebrate both surviving to return and earning a considerable amount through eliminating the goblin horde. Among them, the female Holy Knight carried some lingering dissatisfaction. Despite taking down a giant goblin champion, she still received exactly 1 gold coin. Even the Goblin Lord, the mastermind behind that major raid, was only rewarded at the same rate. Nevertheless, Goblin Slayer gave that reward to the priestess, as he believed she was the one deserving glory this time. After all, he couldn't have executed the plan without the steadfastness and courage of that companion. In the peaceful scene, the small girl leaned against his shoulder and dozed off in a gentle sleep as a silent thank you. Afterward, Goblin Slayer conversed with his childhood friend who had always followed his every step, and from that conversation, he clearly understood that he shouldn't remain alone anymore. If previously he had only seen goblins as targets to eliminate, now he began to see himself as part of the adventurer community, a place where people were ready to fight not just for fame, but for each other. Looking at his teammates laughing loudly under the guild hall roof, he realized that becoming a true adventurer wasn't simply about hunting monsters, but about trusting others, fighting for something greater than oneself. As for the priestess, she also awoke and felt awkward, having fallen asleep without realizing when. Cowgirl also soon left so the two could have some private time. Although receiving that single gold coin, she still hesitated to keep it. However, Goblin Slayer didn't mind. For him, seeing everyone safe and knowing she was still by his side was the most precious thing. The priestess gently asked why he always reluctantly sought others' help. Dark memories of the destroyed village and an abandoned past made him always believe no one would come to save him, especially in urgent situations. But her sincere affirmation made him begin to waver. If one day he faced danger, she would certainly come, not just her, but all who had accompanied him in battles. In response to that promise, she expressed a desire to see his real face behind the familiar iron helmet. Though he didn't react too clearly, the old friend group like the shaman, high elf archer, and priest all felt no less excited, because who wouldn't be curious about the true appearance of someone who had always hidden behind an armor helmet for such a long time. Finally, in the armored heart of that silent goblin hunter, a ray of faith seemed to flicker that there would be a time, in the darkest moment, when he would no longer be alone.